So the colleagues at CEED made this event, this conference, Reimagining the future, which in a way it's quite safe and standard. It fits well. People don't notice it, so it's just very cheap. But on the other hand, it's also quite refreshing. Because for the last year, when we were discussing future, it was mostly about when will this end? So also I try to approach this topic of future from this point of view. So where we came in the last a year and a half, and how we're moving now forward. But let me start with my, let's say, personal journey for the last year and a half. I think it's almost exactly a year and a half, because it was 12th of March, I think, when I posted a Slack message to all my employees, so I'm the CEO of a company of about 60 people here in Ljubljana, that they should take home everything they need to be able to work from home, because we don't know if we will come back to the office the next day. And we didn't come the next day or for the next few months. So as a CEO, I was not able to predict or to plan even the next day. And this is something that continued then for the next weeks, the next months. And again, as a CEO, my focus more or less narrowed on how to get through, how to plan for the next weeks, setting some criteria on when some cost-management restrictions will be lifted, or when we'll come back to the office. But then, I would say, sometime this year, I just had enough of this narrow thinking and narrow planning, and I said to myself, Marko, enough of that. Allow yourself to fly again, so release all the energy that was somehow stored in myself. And I really started going from this very narrow focus back to strategy, vision, and so on. So this was my story. And I think it actually applies to all, let's say, the companies which struggled during the last year and a half, but also the companies that exploded in the last year and a half. And first, I would like to hear your personal stories, how your, let's say, relationship with the future evolved during this 18 months. Let's start with Tristan.
Oh, wow. Well, all last year I lived in my parents' basement. Yeah, I think it definitely changed my perspective on the future to the point where I probably leaned even more into this idea I have of like treating life like a river and not taking the path of least resistance. And I think I leaned a bit more into that, where we had been kind of digital nomads for the previous 2 years of COVID. As soon as we got back, it was basically, as COVID ramped up, we were, visiting our parents in the Twin Cities, and then that just led into keeping that, staying there. But we had all these ideas of like how we wanted to foster community. Living on the road, you don't end up, it's harder to have that community around you all the time because we moved around a lot. We're gonna move to the Pacific Northwest and buy a house in Seattle. We had all these plans, and now we're kind of I think it's taken a step back in that sense and been more okay going the path of least resistance. And I think sometimes there's this idea in startups especially where it's hustle culture, and I'm totally love to be a hustler, love to work hard, but there's the idea that if you're not working hard and grinding it out, then you're not working hard enough, or you're not doing your job. And that oftentimes, I think too much of that can lead to burnout. And I think I've kind of come back to this as sometimes it's okay to take the easy path, or the path of least resistance, or to automate your processes, or to methodically and thoughtfully do something so that you don't have to work as hard. You can empower people to do their job easier. So it doesn't always have to be about working every weekend and every night. So I think that's what COVID taught me.
Thoughtful approach to running a business, taking more time also for decisions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then you don't have to rush sometimes.
I kind of feel.
You said, was it the 13th of March? That was that D-Day for you?
Yeah, that was the first day when we stayed at home.
So,
it was Friday the 13th.
Yeah, so I think I remember that day because, well, in Ireland, 17th of March is St. Patrick's Day. I'm sure you're familiar with Paddy's Day. It's a day the Irish like to get together and celebrate the joys of alcohol. And you know that when the government cancels St. Patrick's Day, it's a sign that the world is possibly ending, because it has never happened before. And so, at the same time, the 13th of March, the government in Ireland announced that Paddy's Day was cancelled. So I knew we were screwed. And then over the next week or so, I lost half my revenue overnight, because actually, I have the agency we have is very, it's fun. We pick and choose our clients. We have no more than 5 or 6 at any one time. And they're all emergent deep tech. One was in the fintech space for the cruise sector. Yeah. There was travel and accommodation. Yeah. So we really struggled. And I have to say, my job is to look forward. My job is to find the opportunities. So very quickly, I went into problem-solving mode. You know, that kind of like, okay, we're going to fix this. What's the problems? What's the opportunities? And we recognized that there would be several verticals that would be emergent. And we put our money on e-commerce and virtual comms. So really fast, we got really, really good at virtual conferences and at delivering support for scaling e-commerce companies. We also recognize that government projects, which is not something I generally like to pitch for, because they're really slow, but these would be a safe bet. So we changed our positioning and we looked for the safe bets, and it was really amazing. I mean, we learned so much. And if you look at virtual comms, virtual events, online communication, productivity tools, all the different new players in this market, fascinating. You look at how e-commerce and supply chains have completely accelerated. 10 years of futureness, all squashed into 6 months, 12 months. It's phenomenal to watch how it's changed. And I think lots of that, the new technologies and the new innovations have seeped now into our collective consciousness. And a lot has been gained if you go look at it. So it's super exciting.
Rational and offensive approach.
Yeah, and we did it but then I bit off more than I could chew. So by the time October came, I was totally burnt out. But yeah, it was a really interesting time if you were prepared to find the opportunities. Yeah, for sure.
Anton?
Yeah, since we're sharing stories how COVID got to us, I also have one. Like in March of 2020, I was actually in Boston at a business trip, and I visited an NBA game. Boston Celtics is a great team. There was a game with Utah Jazz. So then I'm flying home around 8th of March, and people start getting a bit crazy, but I'm like, yeah, okay, looks weird. And then 2 days later, the news hey, NBA suspended Utah Jazz players got tested positive for COVID at this Boston game. I'm like, okay, it's good that I was at the very highest row of seats, very far away from the court side, and then I had a lockdown 1 week later. That's kind of the moment when I realized it's real. And then what changed? A lot of things. I forgot how to talk to people in person, so if I'm making weird sounds, sorry. But what I felt a big change professionally is, as an engineering leader and manager, I started having much more accountability for how my team feels and other teams feel and how they go through it, whether I like it or not. Since now they had much less interaction with other people, seeing less friends, close ones, but the work was still there, thankfully. And making sure everyone feels good and you're still positive, though the situation isn't the best. So I'd say to me it was the biggest change.
Compassionate approach to your team members. I felt this too, and a lot of people actually that we had a better relationship, especially one-to-one, even through Zoom.
Yeah, like tomorrow we'll have a session where we can talk a bit more about this.
I was in San Francisco that day. I had just completed a visit of a client of mine, one of 4 clients. And I went to a restaurant that's managed by friends, and it was nearly empty. People were panicking in San Francisco very early. And the next day I got on a plane back to New York. There were maybe 7 passengers on a pretty large airplane. And during that flight, the President of the United States announced that he would shut down travel to the US from Europe. So I thought that was an awakening. The very next day, over the next 3 days, I lost all of my clients. And I was worried a little bit, mostly about telling my wife about it. And then I realized that I make a very good tiramisu that my wife loves. And so I made the tiramisu, she loved it. Everything was fine within 2 weeks, job offers, like everything was sort of already back into sort of looking up. And so I think I learned 2 things. One is urgency is a very relative concept. We got to March of 2020 thinking with a mindset of everything is urgent. Everything is life-threatening. An email at 10 in the evening about something that is not urgent at all, but you would get it and you would probably even reply to it. I think we realize that urgency is a relative concept, and we've learned, all of us, we've learned how to be better about urgency. The second thing I learned is, if you know how to make a tiramisu, it will all be okay in the end.
Bakery is a way of handling the crisis.
You don't bake a tiramisu. Does it go in the oven?
Yeah, so the pandemic was very different for me. I had moved to Mexico about 6 weeks before, so I moved in the middle of January, and I had rented an Airbnb for 6 weeks, and then moved into a new apartment on Sunday, and then on Thursday, like you, we had the email that you're now permanently working from home. So, you make all these decisions in life to rent a place near all the cool bars and all the cool restaurants, and then you never actually go see them. You're like, oh, I don't need to have a big space because I'm not going to be here, I'm not going to constantly be out. And then you're stuck in that space for months on end. Trying to get to know a new team, trying to manage people who you haven't managed before, trying to figure out what can I change. Even just, our product is a lot for in-person payments. That's not happening, right? So how do we actually change our plans, our budget, trying to adjust the marketing spend to make things more effective. And then also, I'm single, I don't have any kids. This was the first time I wasn't traveling. Like most years, I go to 10, 15 countries a year, and now I'm just stuck, right, in one place. And so I had all this extra time on my hands, and I just didn't know what to do with it. So last July, I launched my own angel syndicate. On AngelList, I had 0 people, and I just started harassing everybody I knew. Everybody else was bored at home as well, so I just was able to get person after person on Zoom calls, slowly convince them to join. And over the last year, we went from 0 people last July to now we have almost 2,000 LPs. We've invested more than $11 million across 50 deals all over the world. So, being able to do the Zoom calls, hop on with companies in Asia, in Latin America, in Europe, has just been kind of a game changer.
So you made a crisis into an opportunity.
Yeah,
That's good. Okay, so let's move now 10 years in the future. Let's say we're on CEED's Founders Talk 2031. And we are discussing what kind of companies made it really big after the pandemic because of their leadership styles, because of the products that they had, because of the people that work there, or any kind of so what do you think? And I would like to hear it from your perspectives of your industries. What kind of companies will make it? What will be the big companies that made it because of the crisis? Tristan.
Good question. I think that there will be, I'm kind of thinking of this from the climate space, and obviously that plays into transportation and real estate and all these agriculture, all these big sectors. But I think there's still a huge opportunity around cohesiveness across these sectors, kind of like the question that you asked, like, how do I actually understand the supply chain? Where do I get the data to understand the impact that my whole operation is happening? And so I think climate data, impact data, being better at ESG reporting and understanding your total footprint is still something that's like being built out in a lot of different ways. And personally, I'm kind of paying a lot of attention to what's happening with being built on the blockchain. And so I'm really psyched by this kind of like crypto for climate space, inverse to like climate for crypto, which is like, I think that the blockchain will continually becoming greener, and there's good options there to upgrade the technology, but more excited around ideas like regen, or there's like even an Estonian company called Single Earth, and they are like becoming this ledger or database to track like what is happening across offsetting or carbon removal activities, and giving you a better gauge on, because before there was a lot of like double counting and there was fraud, and so I think there's like a lot that can happen in the data analytics and like what's actually happening in the real world. I had a satellite company that I had worked with for a while too that was like, they can see, they like were tracking like methane leaks from big industry complexes, and it's just like this stuff wasn't really getting caught at all before. So I think there's a long way to go as far as imaging and data, and then building that transparency across borders, across corporations, so that everyone has it.
Exciting. I mean, for me, being some of you guys with software, very virtual thinking, you're discussing some big ideas that really can be materialized in the world. It's really exciting. So, Emily.
So there's so many things that you could talk about what's coming down the future, but 10 years from now, one of the biggest changes I think we'll see from a very practical perspective is the changes in third level education. We all know that AI, automation, is going to take away many of the jobs that are the next generation. My kids would go to college to learn about everything from legals to accountancy to even engineering. All of these courses are no longer relevant. In 30 years' time, IBM have predicted that 70% of the careers we train for today simply will not exist. And so, third level education, in my opinion, the universities are like dinosaurs that don't yet know that someone has cut their legs off, and they're still waving their little tiny hands around, and pretty soon they're going to fall over, right? So I think how we educate ourselves, that I think education will be completely transformed. And I look at cohort-based platforms for new learning. I look at immersive software education. I look at Lambda School from the Colsons, from one of the Strike brothers. I look at new ways of people upskilling and training. And I think that, and COVID also called, I was due to give a TEDx talk in the university at home about this topic, and it got cancelled, so thank you for coming to my smaller TED talk. But it's about, I think, computer science, data, and philosophy, creativity, ethics, art. These are things that we have to intertwine with our understanding of software. So I think third level education is going to be completely transformed. I don't know how, but it's coming. Second of all, I think that drone technology is really going to transform how our everyday lives occur. There's a really interesting startup called Mana Aero in Ireland, and they're testing delivery of takeaway food delivered to your home. And I think the concerns around pandemics, people working more remotely, I think drone technology is going to really transform our everyday life, because it's already here, right? And then, thirdly, I would think about looking to China, because what's happening there is so incredible. They're so far advanced in terms of how they're utilizing certain technologies. If anyone's familiar with WeChat, that particular social platform is so ubiquitous, it's so essential to everyday life. So I think it's really interesting how social networks have transformed communities and cultures. I also think NFTs and digital identity is going to change drastically, and of course, the banks, the current banks, they're all going to be European banks, they're doomed. I think disruptor banks are really going to make a big difference.
So I can think of two big things. One is, I think only adaptable companies will survive and strive. I probably take some points from Daniel, like his talk, but yeah, companies, I think COVID showed it well, right? If you can rearrange internally, rearrange your external strategies, there's much higher chance you'll be still around and even grow. And I mean, COVID happened now, right? In 2008 we had a crisis. I can only imagine there's going to be something in the next 10 years. So making sure you can get through and adapt and change. And it can mean a ton. It's like, people now remote. Some of the old management techniques just don't work anymore, so you have to adapt and change. So that's one big thing. And second, I can again plug in for automation and AI. It's pretty advanced now, but what I think will happen is not necessarily technological advances and like new algorithms and stuff, which of course will also happen, but areas of the application. Like I have a couple examples from maybe agriculture. It's something we don't really think about. But it's like self-driving cars, right? Like Tesla's trying it, but they're like self-driving conveyors and like all this hard machinery. And it's simpler, it's easier than generic self-driving on the streets. It's still a hard problem. Or I've seen recently some guys, they try to build a startup where they monitor how cows, how their milk is extracted and highlight some problems. It's fascinating. And I have no idea how many other areas in life that we didn't touch yet, and how they're going to be changed. So that's what I think. So.
I think we talk about AI. Let's say already now, so is ethics high on the priority list? Or
very
expected to be?
Yes. I had it very briefly in my presentation, we call it bias and fairness in the company, but it's a very big area right now, and it will only get more and more.
Imagine you have a self-driving car, and the car has been programmed to drive down the street. Now, it faces a scenario where it hits a mother and a child, or two men. This is an ethical dilemma. So the machine, you have to teach the machine to make decisions.
And then who take the responsibility? That's a big one.
So we're back to education, because engineering schools should be teaching ethics probably, because engineers will be deciding who lives and who dies.
It used to be this completely tangential course, and now it's fundamental to computer science.
Then 10 years from now.
Before I worked in technology, I studied history. And one thing I learned was that every big crisis hides a bigger one. And so I've spent the last year and a half looking for things that were not COVID to see if I have to be alarmed about any of those. I think that 10 years from today, we're going to be talking about one of two things. One is cybersecurity. One of the events that happened in the last 6 months that maybe was not as big of a deal in Slovenia, but for the first time in the US, a major utility company was disrupted by Russian hackers. That could very well be the beginning of an actual cyber warfare. We don't know. But I think 10 years from today, cybersecurity will be an enormous concern. On a more optimistic note, I was surprised by the continuity of society during COVID. We sent everybody home except for some critical work functions. Nothing, fundamental changed in our access to electricity, to water, and to all of those things, at least not in the Western world. And so one company that I think might have had a role in enabling this is a company called Gecko Robotics. And it's not sexy, it doesn't do anything that sounds interesting. All they do is maintenance of power plants, and sort of big power plants. Now, power plants need to be switched off once a year for a pretty big inspection. And it's an inspection that is very dangerous. Humans usually perform it. And it takes about 1 week. Humans are sort of literally dropped down into plants and they have to do very dangerous tasks. It's one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. What this company has built is a gecko, a robot that performs the inspection in 1 day with a remote operator and software. Now, I don't know exactly how many clients they have and how big of a role they've had, but there were some people who could probably stay home during the COVID pandemic, and the power plants shut off for 1 day instead of 7, and that maintenance continued. I think if I were to bet on one company, that's going to be one of the big stories of the next decade.
Technology and a bit of AI.
This is not really a drone, it's similar, but it literally, they called it a gecko because it can climb on a wall without any kind of brace or rope. It has its own ability to stick to the wall and move with the camera.
Your view on the next 10 years?
I think one of the interesting things is, whenever you go through stuff like this, right, like the ramifications that affect the young. So we now have, a generation of high school students, college students, early employees who are doing everything through Zoom, who are doing everything virtually. And I think that's going to have really long-lasting impacts on their future. There was a survey in the US where they asked millennial workers about coming back, and something like 75 or 80% of people said they'd rather quit their job than go back to the office. Now, I'm guessing that as we start making people go back, it's not going to be 75, 80%. But even personally, right, like, I don't want to go back to the office. Like, I can go and do multiple jobs at home and do it much more effectively. And I don't have to sit an hour in traffic. I don't have to, take 2 hours for lunch, like custom in Mexico. I don't have to do all those things. So I think you're going to start to see young people, de-urbanize. They want more space. They don't necessarily see all the benefits of the cities the same way we do. I think it's going to change how property works. I think people want more flexibility. They want to be able to work remotely. They want to have co-working spaces. And I think WeWork might have just been a few years too early in that sense. I think we're going to see a dramatic shift there. I think we're going to see, we already see, right, a rise of small businesses, a rise of e-commerce. I think tools that make that easier, things like Wix or Square and these other sorts of payment things for small and medium-sized businesses, giving them the ability to build out, Amazon. I think those are going to continue to be the story. Is the shift from bigger corporations to smaller businesses, the shift from people working, in an urban center to de-urbanizing. How many people have left San Francisco and New York over the last couple of years? What that does to property, what that does to property management, what that does to ownership of that property. I think those are going to be the interesting things that we're going to see as ramifications in the next 10 years.
I think Silicon Valley as a physical place can move into a kind of online global community without even having a kind of a physical headquarters.
I mean, many of the VCs are moving to either Austin or to Miami. Like every day you're on Twitter and they're tweeting about it, right? Like they at least believe it. We have 8 VC moved to Austin, right? You have a lot of these people that are moving out.
tax advantages of not basing your business in California are pretty significant, although legislation hasn't really caught up.
Do you think this is going to change as well how companies hire? Like at the moment in Ireland, I'm pretty sure it's the same everywhere. Getting decent developers is like trying to find hen's teeth. I don't know if that's an expression that translates, but now your recruitment pool is global or international. It's now possible to hire someone that's not in the same landmass as you because the systems have become more forward-thinking. So it opens up new talent, new markets, and actually this is a really interesting advantage because by having team members from different geographic locations that are more diverse, they bring extra perspective to your organization. That diversity of perspective and that diversity of experience provides you with much better decision-making capabilities. So I think that's a good thing.
But you need to be first or on the first model, because once everyone is hiring from everywhere and everyone is selling to everyone, we are leveled again. So it's status quo.
I guess you just have to get a bit subversive about this, maybe you're right.
Exactly.
But I think there's an inherent optimization in size. All of a sudden, an American employer can choose to hire people in Slovenia, and it's a lot easier. They don't need to try to get a work visa for someone to come to work in New York or California. They can just buy a software like any of these companies that do international payrolling, and you put a person on the payroll from Slovenia, probably cheaper for an American business, and quite possibly better than what you can get for a lot of money in a very competitive space. So I think it's an equalizer anyway.
Yeah, especially with the dev teams, which is kind of what CTO.ai is like, started to have these hints to different staff augmentation firms so that, you know, as everybody's moved to even more so online, that it can level the playing field so you can be based wherever but still have top technical team.
And I think Emily was saying something very interesting about education. In the US, we have a terrible education system when it comes to training for the sciences compared to so many other countries. And we've kind of hidden that by hiring a lot of foreign engineers. Now it's going to be a lot easier because you don't have to try and get a visa for them, which takes forever.
Yeah. Do we have time for another question? Yes? Okay. So I would also like to add a little bit more value also for the audience. So we've looked at the past, we've discussed vision 10 years. What can an entrepreneur in Slovenia do in the next months, year, 2, 3? What kind of behaviors do we need to change? What do we need to stop doing? What do we need to start doing? Maybe one thing from each of you that will help us achieve the vision that we just set for the future. We have about 30% less time than for the last 2 rounds, just to set the expectation.
Buy as much Bitcoin as possible. Or realistically, spend some time to actually define your mission and like the impact that you want to impart on the world with your business.
I was asking the team about, the psychology of the cultural psychology of this part of the world, of Slovenia. And it seems to me you have an abundance of skills, of talent, of technical capacity. But I don't think generally as a nation you're very good about praising yourself or elevating yourself. And actually, if there's one thing I would say, it's like learn how to be proud of what you can do, learn to be super proud about what you can do, because on an international stage, you have to be able to beat your own drum. So get better at beating your own drum.
So I'll say very pragmatic thing. I think everyone here mentioned that remote work is coming, it's already here, remote hiring is coming. And countries like Slovenia, I think, should just start preparing the ground like right now, both from legislative perspective, payroll, taxes, be better than other neighboring countries, so big companies will come here for talent.
going to be very, very practical. I think the majority of businesses here can get the most value in the shortest time by learning about Zapier. How many here don't know what Zapier is? Oh boy. Look it up. It's just a simple technology that helps you integrate different services and automate a lot of processes. Takes a couple of days to learn, and it will take so many headaches off of your plate, so much nonsense. 2 months, you will send me an email and thank me.
I think understanding the problems that are local, that other people aren't trying to solve, that you guys have the unique insight into solving. A lot of people try to do the coolest technology. A lot of people try to do things that are going to be huge global solutions, which is great, right? If you have that game-changing idea, do it. But there's also just a lot of stuff that we run into on a day-to-day basis that you struggle with that I have no clue about as an American investor. But if you can prove out that it works here, there's other markets that are going to have similar problems that you can go and adapt your solution to. But I think thinking locally and acting locally can also be super beneficial.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much to all of you. I really enjoyed this talk.
Marko, yeah. We have a question for you. So can you answer those questions too, those last two? You answered the first one about
I will need to remember what the questions were.
So 10 years from now, and one super practical thing for everybody here to take away.
So I have no time actually to prepare. This is total surprise.
Neither
This wasn't in the program. So I hope that Tristan's vision when it comes to sustainability will come true. I also hope that the business will become more thoughtful, that we'll stop treating everything urgent, start making better decisions, start connecting with people in more better, intimate way, understanding people that we work with in my company. I try to do that. And I think the results will come if we do that. Any kind of results, any kind of business will thrive under these conditions. And the other question was, practical advice.
Yeah, for entrepreneurs.
Entrepreneurs.
If you need a minute to think about it, I can say something real quick. I just want to say thank you. I've been to a lot of conferences, and this was very well organized. So I think I speak on behalf of everyone here. Thank you for inviting us. It's absolutely wonderful and very interesting. Get your answer ready. Just find your time.
Stop listening to him.
In terms of practical advice especially for those that are in the startup phase, so I'm a bit out of that, let's say, the scaling phase. But I'm really grateful to myself, actually, to focus on simplifying and automating business from the first day when this was not necessary. Last minute, all the processes, so HR, CRM, this is something that our company does, so this is why I have additional motivation. But nowadays, company 10 years old, I'm really proud of how we run our company in terms of processes. I would say it's optimal, but still quite good. So this is what I would recommend to you. Start from the first day thinking how your company will look like when you're 20 years old, and what kind of automation systems you have in place. Yeah, I like this. We discussed Zapier yesterday, half an hour. So he got me excited. Okay. Any comment from the audience? Question? Yes, please.
How many of you have ever thought about that it's really nice to have a business and make profit, but you know that you're not capable of making a great change? How many of you have ever thought, except you, Tristan, I think I know your answer. How many of you have ever thought about making a global political change and connect entrepreneurs in making a real change? Everybody's talking about let's make a business, we know what to make, we know what to scale. But I never see really entrepreneurs acting
add something to your question?
Marko, can you repeat? I don't think everybody heard.
So the question was, how many of us on the podium were thinking about, let's say, transferring our knowledge, energy, our plans, business into, let's say, a more kind of a generous sphere in politics. This is the question. And I would add, so because this is something that I was thinking a lot, not about me, you are maybe also, but in America there is this trend of activist CEOs. So I know this because that we work for Salesforce as this CEO, which is an activist CEO, standing for all sorts of positive things. But my question would be here also, just kind of to make it more interesting. This is good stuff. But what if we get a CEO that is activist for the wrong stuff? So how do we know? Okay.
So, a few years ago, a good few years ago, I was head of corporate fundraising in UNICEF in Ireland. So, looking at corporate social responsibility of working with big companies like IKEA, Procter & Gamble, all the airlines, for cause-related marketing. And since then, like, the world has changed, and technology, I feel like the answers are going to have to come from not just entrepreneurs that are trying to make the world a better place, bottom up, but also top down. And it's the enterprise, the global enterprises, like the Stripes of this world, that can make changes that can have a significant impact. So long-lasting, sustainable change doesn't come from lots of people setting up small charities. It comes from governmental change, policy change, social impact programs. And social impact is a really interesting emergent trend across different countries. I know that Ireland has a social impact fund. And then there's really interesting entrepreneurs that are doing stuff like Water Bear. I don't know if you know the Water Bear network. It's like a Netflix for the environment. It's small, incredibly short, incredibly impactful movies, and you can donate, you can subscribe, you can support. So I really feel like there's definitely a lot of great things that are happening, but bottom up and top down. We're definitely getting there. But it's about unifying for meaningful, long-lasting change as opposed to, greenwashing or ticking a box.
Anyone else?
I lend some of my time. Actually, I'll start differently. I think one of the biggest problems we have is that we're seeing the worst part of democracy in the last few years. Social media has been exploited much more effectively by certain types of political interests than by ones that are truly interested in solving problems. When I point the blame, I'm not actually talking about one political side. I see a lot of very guilty people on both sides who are not interested in solving problems, but just in winning votes. So I've lent a lot of my time to an organization called Untitled America. And their philosophy is that because of how the electoral system is set up in the United States, there is absolutely no way for any change to occur unless there is at least some collaboration between the two political sides. And so this is an organization that is trying to impact election reform more than anything else, because if you can impact the rules that we use to choose our leaders, you can actually change the behavior of our leaders. I have absolutely no confidence in the fact that it will work. I do it out of hope and personal interest and passion. But again, I think it was Winston Churchill who once said that the greatest argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with a voter. And I think that right now, all of those voters who you don't want to be talking to are getting blasted by Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, and all the voters that give you hope, that give you maturity, and that really make you believe in the future are kind of don't find a voice in all of this information. I honestly don't think business is going to solve this. Like, the solution has to come from people and government. Businesses are always just going to be after the money.
But I it should be connected, and I think it's not. It's like somebody once told me, you cannot be an activist or go into politics if you're running a business. It's either or, and that is like almost like a mentor to me. And I think that's a mindset that got into a lot of entrepreneurs, and I think it's wrong.
Disagreeability is going to be one of the things that set you apart. And if you're prepared to stand up for your values and what you believe, it's going to set you apart from the others. And if you're strong enough and confident enough to do that, I fundamentally believe, certainly in Europe, maybe not other parts of the world, but if you're prepared to live your values and stick by them, I think you can have a voice and a political opinion and still run your business. I do believe that.